Gary plays at the Bears Club quite often,
Yeah.
and we play together. Or we did used to play together. I don't play anymore. He beats my brains out now.
Yeah.
We came in last fall, and we were doing a fundraiser. Gary was up in Loxahatchee, and he was really upset that he bogeyed the last hole for 69.
Golf is built on honor. It is the only major sport where players call penalties on themselves, where a handshake means everything, and where trust holds the game together. So when legends start whispering, "he's a cheater," about one of their own, the entire foundation cracks. Gary Player, the Black Knight, won 9 majors and became a global icon. But behind the smiles and the fitness preaching, something darker was brewing. Legends like Tom Watson, Phil Mickelson, Tiger Woods, and even Augusta National itself turned against him. Not because of jealousy, not because of competition, but because of a pattern that stretched across 50 years. A pattern of bending rules, crossing lines, and burning bridges. Today, we are breaking down exactly why some of the greatest golfers in history could not stand Gary Player. And the answer might shock you. What did Gary Player do that made these icons snap? What moments pushed them past the breaking point? If you want more deep dives like this, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype while we unpack the controversy. Because this story is not just about one man. It is about what happens when someone tests the limits of a sport that runs on integrity. And when we dig into the timeline, when we follow the trail of burned relationships and broken trust, we find something that goes far deeper than simple rivalry or competitive tension. We find a career built on undeniable achievement, but shadowed by persistent controversy. We find moments that individually might be explained away, but together form a pattern too clear to ignore. We find a legend whose own peers could not bring themselves to fully trust him, even as the world celebrated his victories. Gary Player was supposed to be untouchable. 3 Masters titles, 3 Open championships, 3 PGA championships, a career Grand Slam completed in 1965. He was part of the Big Three, with Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus. Together, they turned golf into a global business worth billions. They traveled the world, played exhibition matches, and transformed professional golfers into international celebrities. The marketing machine wanted them to be brothers in arms, legends who lifted each other up and respected each other without reservation. But that image was a carefully constructed myth, a facade built for television cameras and corporate sponsors. Behind it, in locker rooms across the PGA Tour, the reality was far more complicated. The whispers were louder than the cheers. Players did not see the Black Knight ambassador that the public adored. They saw someone who played in the gray areas of the rules, someone who always seemed to get the benefit of the doubt from officials, someone whose ball always seemed to be found just in time, right before the search limit expired, someone who seemed to have an unusual gift for improving difficult lies. And over the decades, across continents and tournaments and major championships, that suspicion built into something much worse: resentment, anger, and in some cases, outright hatred. The thing about golf is that reputation matters more than trophies. You can win every major championship in existence and still be an outcast if your peers do not trust you. You can have the perfect public image, the endorsement deals, the magazine covers, and still walk into a locker room where nobody wants to shake your hand. And Gary Player became the walking example of that truth. His controversies were not isolated mistakes that could be written off as bad luck or misunderstandings. They were a timeline, a chronological roadmap of incidents that kept piling up decade after decade, until even the most patient legends, the ones who wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, could not stay silent anymore. The pattern was too clear, the evidence was too strong, and the moment of reckoning was inevitable. So let's count down the 5 biggest reasons why PGA icons turned on Gary Player. We are starting with the smaller feuds, the personality clashes that might seem petty on the surface, and working our way systematically to the moment that changed everything. The moment when the accusations went from whispered rumors to public confrontation. The moment when a legend looked another legend in the eye and said the word that no golfer ever wants to hear: cheater. But before we get there, we need to understand how the foundation cracked, how years of small fractures led to the complete collapse of trust. Because this is not a story about one bad day. This is a story about a lifetime of choices. Number 5, Johnny Miller and the fitness war that exposed players' insecurity. Gary Player loved talking about fitness. Not just loved it, built his entire identity around it. It was the core of his brand, the thing that separated him from every other golfer of his generation. He was the guy doing push-ups in the locker room at age 50. The guy eating health food before anyone knew what health food was. The guy telling everyone who would listen that discipline, exercise, and clean living were the keys to longevity in professional sports. For decades, people respected that commitment. They admired the work ethic. They acknowledged that players' fitness obsession probably helped him compete at the highest level well into his 50s. He became known as the grandfather of golf fitness, and that label mattered to him more than almost anything else. But then, Johnny Miller, working as an analyst for NBC, made a comment that lit a fuse player could not extinguish. Miller was watching Rory McIlroy, one of the most talented young players in the world, and he noticed something. Rory had been hitting the gym hard, building muscle mass, trying to add power to his already impressive distance. And Miller, with decades of experience as both a player and an analyst, suggested that maybe, just maybe, all that heavy weight training was interfering with Rory's swing mechanics. It was a standard golf analysis. Coaches and commentators debate this stuff constantly. The relationship between strength and flexibility, the trade-off between power and precision, the risk of building so much muscle that it restricts your natural swing path. Miller was not attacking fitness. He was making a technical observation about one specific player's approach. But Gary Player did not take it as analysis or technical commentary. He took it as a personal attack on everything he stood for. He heard Miller questioning the value of fitness in golf. And for Player, that was like questioning his entire legacy. So when Rory McIlroy won his next tournament, proving that his gym work was not hurting him after all, Player saw an opening. He went on social media and publicly mocked Johnny Miller. He used Rory's success as proof that Miller was an idiot who did not understand modern golf. He trolled him with the kind of pettiness you would expect from a teenager, not from a man in his 70s, who was supposed to represent the dignity and class of professional golf. It was embarrassing. It was unnecessary. It was mean-spirited. And it showed something crucial about Player's personality that had been bubbling under the surface for his entire career. He could not let anything go. Every criticism, no matter how mild or how technical, felt like a threat to his legacy. Every debate about fitness in golf became a referendum on Gary Player's relevance. And he responded not with grace or humor or thoughtful counter-arguments, but with attacks. Johnny Miller was not some random hater or jealous rival. He was a major champion, a US Open winner, one of the most respected voices in sports broadcasting. But Player treated him like a joke, like someone whose opinion did not matter, like someone who needed to be publicly humiliated for daring to question the fitness gospel, according to Gary Player. Other legends noticed. They saw a man who was supposed to be an elder statesman, someone who should have been above petty feuds, acting like an insecure teenager who needed to win every single argument. It was not just the Miller incident. It was the pattern. Player seemed incapable of accepting that someone might have a different perspective, that fitness might not be the answer to every problem in golf, that his way was not the only way. And that insecurity, that desperate need for validation, added another layer to the reputation Player had been building for decades. The reputation of a man who needed to be right, who needed to be the center of attention, who needed to win not just on the golf course, but in every conversation, every debate, every conflict, even the ones that did not matter, even the ones that made him look small. Number 4, Augusta National and the ultimate institutional rejection. If you want to understand how far Gary Player's reputation fell, how completely he lost the trust and respect of the golf establishment, you have to look at what happened with Augusta National. The Masters is not just another tournament. It is the most prestigious event in professional golf. Winning the green jacket is the dream of every player who has ever picked up a club. Augusta National is treated like sacred ground. The perfectly manicured fairways, the azaleas in bloom every April, the traditions that never change. The club does not just host a golf tournament, it guards the soul of the sport. And membership, even proximity to the club's inner circle, is the highest honor golf can bestow. Gary Player won the Masters 3 times. 1961, 1974, and 1978. Those victories secured his place in golf history and earned him something incredibly rare, the role of honorary starter. This position, shared with only a handful of the greatest champions, is reserved for legends who represent the very best of what golf stands for: honor, integrity, respect for tradition. It should have been the perfect ending to Player's story, a ceremonial role that let him stand on the first tee every April and remind the world of his greatness. But then came the 2021 ceremony, and everything fell apart. The honorary starters that year were honoring Lee Elder, a trailblazer who broke barriers in the sport as the first black golfer to compete in the Masters. It was supposed to be a moment of profound respect and historical significance. A chance to acknowledge how far golf had come and the courage it took for Elder to step onto that first tee decades earlier when the sport was still deeply segregated. The ceremony was being broadcast live around the world. Millions of people were watching. The focus was supposed to be entirely on honoring Elder's legacy. But Gary Player's son, Wayne, who was caddying for his father, turned it into a branding opportunity. During the live broadcast, with cameras rolling and the world watching, Wayne held up golf balls with a specific company logo printed on them. He positioned them right behind Lee Elder's shoulder, making sure the brand was visible to every viewer. It was shameless. It was disrespectful. It was a calculated attempt to use a moment of historical significance for personal financial gain. And Augusta National, an institution that values discretion and tradition above absolutely everything else, does not tolerate that kind of behavior. The club's response was swift and brutal. They banned Wayne Player for life. Not for a year, not with a chance to apologize in return. Forever. He would never be allowed back on the grounds of Augusta National. And if you understand how rare that kind of permanent ban is, how protective Augusta is of its image, and how reluctant they are to create public controversies, you realize how serious the violation must have been. This was not a minor breach of etiquette. This was an attack on the very values the club holds sacred. But instead of apologizing, instead of distancing himself from his son's actions and recognizing the damage that had been done, Gary Player went public with his complaints. He criticized Augusta National for being too harsh. He made it about himself and his family rather than about the disrespect shown to Lee Elder and the institution. And then he crossed a line that made things even worse. Player complained that the club would not allow him to play a round of golf with his 3 grandsons. He said, and this is a direct quote, "I have been an ambassador for Augusta for all these years, yet they won't let me have 1 round of golf in my life with my 3 grandsons." The entitlement in that statement was stunning. Augusta National had just been embarrassed on a global stage during one of the most important ceremonies in the club's history. The focus had been stolen from Lee Elder, a man who deserved nothing but respect, and turned into a commercial. And Gary Player's response was to complain about not getting special treatment for his family. He framed it as if the club was being unreasonable, as if his decades of service entitled him to ignore what his son had done, as if being a 3-time champion meant the rules did not apply to him. Chairman Fred Ridley and the rest of Augusta's leadership were done. They had protected Player's image for years. They had given him the honor of being a starter. They had celebrated his legacy at every opportunity. But there are limits, and Player had crossed them. This was not just a bad look or an unfortunate incident. It was a betrayal of the trust that Augusta had placed in him and his family. The club's message was clear. Your achievements do not give you a pass to disrespect this institution. Your history does not make you immune to consequences. And your sense of entitlement does not align with the values we represent. Number 3, the steroid bomb that alienated an entire generation. In 2007, Gary Player stepped into a controversy that would burn bridges with an entire era of golfers. And unlike the fitness feud with Johnny Miller or the institutional friction with Augusta, this was not about personal insults or family embarrassment. This was about Player making an accusation so reckless, so damaging, and so poorly thought out that it poisoned his relationships with virtually every active professional golfer. At the Open Championship at Carnoustie in Scotland, one of golf's most storied venues, Player decided to drop a bomb. He told reporters that he personally knew at least 2 professional golfers who were using performance-enhancing drugs. Not that he suspected it, not that he had heard rumors. He said he knew it for a fact. But then he refused to name them. He refused to provide any proof. He just dropped the accusation like a grenade into the middle of the professional tour and then walked away from the explosion. The reaction was instant, furious, and came from every corner of the golf world. Tiger Woods, the biggest name in the sport, and arguably the most famous athlete on the planet at that moment, was forced to respond to questions about steroids because Gary Player decided to make unsubstantiated claims. Woods had to stand in front of reporters and defend not just himself, but the entire tour. He said, and you can hear the frustration in his words, "I really don't see anybody doing anything." Kind of surprised to hear that. The dismissive tone said everything that Tiger could not say directly. He was calling Player out for being reckless, for throwing accusations without evidence, for creating a media circus that benefited nobody except Gary Player, who once again found himself at the center of attention. Tiger was not just disagreeing with Player's assessment. He was rejecting the entire premise. And coming from Tiger Woods, that rejection carried enormous weight. Nick Faldo, a 6-time major champion and one of the most analytical minds in golf, was even more blunt in his response. Faldo did not hide behind diplomatic language or carefully worded statements. He looked at the camera and said, "He knows too? I know zero. Never heard of anybody." Faldo was not leaving room for interpretation or nuance. He was saying directly that player was either lying or delusional. That in all of Faldo's years around professional golf, with access to the same locker rooms and the same insider information that player supposedly had, he had never seen or heard anything that would support these claims. It was a devastating response. Faldo was essentially calling out players' credibility in the most public way possible. But perhaps the harshest responses came from the South African players. Ernie Els and Retief Goosen should have been Gary Player's biggest supporters and defenders. They shared a country, a history, and the bond of representing South Africa on the global stage. But even they could not stand by him on this. Els mocked Player's claim with barely disguised contempt and demanded that Player either provide proof or stop talking. He said, "If you've got proof, give us proof." The challenge was direct. Put up or shut up. Either name the players and provide evidence, or admit that you were just trying to stir up controversy for attention. Retief Goosen went even further in questioning players' motives. He told reporters, "I'm uncertain if he intends to harm the sport." Think about that statement. Goosen was not just disagreeing with Player's claim. He was questioning whether Player was deliberately trying to damage professional golf. Whether this was sabotage disguised as concern. That is an incredibly serious accusation to level at a fellow South African, at a man who was supposed to be a legend and a role model. But Goosen said it anyway, because the damage Player was causing was too obvious to ignore. The second-order consequence of this controversy was actually interesting from a policy standpoint. The PGA Tour did accelerate its anti-doping policy after Player's comments brought the issue into the spotlight. So in a purely technical sense, Player achieved what he claimed he wanted. He forced the tour to take performance-enhancing drugs seriously and implement stronger testing procedures. But the cost was enormous and permanent. The modern generation of professional golfers stopped seeing Gary Player as an elder statesman who deserved respect and deference. They saw him as a provocateur, someone who cared more about generating headlines and staying relevant than about protecting the reputations of his peers. Someone who was willing to cast a shadow of suspicion over the entire professional field, including the biggest stars in the sport, just to get his name in the papers. And that resentment never went away. Number 2, the Phil Mickelson explosion and the LIV war that exposed deep hypocrisy. Fast forward to the LIV golf controversy, the moment when professional golf split apart over money, loyalty, and the future of the sport. The PGA Tour, which had dominated men's professional golf for decades, suddenly faced a rival backed by seemingly unlimited Saudi Arabian money. LIV Golf was offering contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars to top players, guaranteed money that dwarfed anything the traditional tour could match. The golf world was divided. Some players saw it as a chance for financial security and freedom. Others saw it as betraying the history and traditions of the sport they loved. Brooks Koepka, a 5-time major champion and one of the most talented players of his generation, decided to join LIV Golf. It was a huge deal. It was a defection that hurt the PGA Tour's credibility and gave LIV immediate legitimacy. And Gary Player, who by this point should have learned to stay out of public controversies, could not resist weighing in. Player criticized Koepka for leaving the PGA Tour. He questioned Koepka's loyalty to the game's traditions and history. He positioned himself as the defender of pure golf, the guardian of values, the voice of the legends who built the sport into what it is today. He suggested that players who joined LIV were motivated purely by greed and were willing to abandon everything that made golf special. And Phil Mickelson, who was one of the primary architects and defenders of the LIV movement, absolutely destroyed Player for those comments. Mickelson's response was not measured or diplomatic. It was a verbal assassination. He called Gary Player a low-class jerk. He accused Player of palpable jealousy toward younger, richer players. He said Player had no idea what he was talking about when it came to the modern economics of professional golf. The words low-class jerk are absolutely brutal. in the context of golf culture. This is a sport that prides itself on manners, decorum, and respect. This is a world where players shake hands after every round, where thank you notes are expected, where class and dignity are supposed to matter above everything else. For Phil Mickelson, who built his own reputation on being a gentleman and a fan favorite, to use that kind of language publicly meant the gloves were completely off. The usual professional courtesies no longer applied. The respect that is normally extended to legends, even legends you disagree with, was gone. Mickelson was not just defending Brooks Koepka or the LIV golf decision. He was attacking Gary Player's entire legacy and credibility. The jealousy accusation was particularly cutting. Mickelson was saying that Player's criticism had absolutely nothing to do with tradition or the integrity of golf. It was about envy. It was about an old man from a previous generation watching younger players sign contracts worth $200 million and realizing that he never had access to that kind of money, that all of his victories, all of his major championships, all of his years of traveling the world had earned him a fraction of what one LIV signing bonus could provide, and that the resentment from that realization was poisoning Player's judgment and turning him into a bitter critic of anyone who had opportunities he never did. Number 1, the moment everything exploded. Tom Watson and the rooted leaf. To understand why so many legends turned on Gary Player, you have to go back to 1983, the Skins game in Arizona. 4 legends on live television: Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Tom Watson, and Gary Player. The format was brutal. Every hole had a prize. If nobody won the hole outright, the money carried over. By the time they reached the 16th hole, the stakes were massive. $120,000 was on the line. That is when Tom Watson saw something that changed everything. He watched Gary Player move a leaf near his ball, but it was not a loose leaf. It was a rooted leaf, part of a living plant. Under the rules of golf, you cannot move something like that. It is considered improving your lie, and in golf, that is cheating. Watson did not call it out on the hole. He waited. But behind the 18th green, with a New York Times reporter standing nearby, Watson confronted Player. The reporter, Dave Anderson, a Pulitzer Prize winner, heard everything. Watson said, "I'm accusing you, Gary. You can't do that. I'm tired of this. I wasn't watching you, but I saw it." The phrase, "I'm tired of this," is the key. Watson was not reacting to one incident. He was reacting to years of suspicion, years of whispers, years of watching Player operate in the gray areas. And Watson had finally had enough. The financial outcome made it worse. Gary Player won $170,000 that day. Tom Watson left with $10,000. Arnold Palmer made $140,000. Jack Nicklaus got $40,000. So the man accused of bending the rules walked away with the biggest payday. Player's defense was that Watson broke etiquette by not calling it out on the hole itself. He wrote later that the incident would haunt Watson. But for Watson and the rest of the professional community, the damage to Player's reputation was permanent. Because Watson's accusation did not exist in a vacuum. It connected to a much older controversy, the 1974 Open Championship at Royal Lytham. Player came to the 17th hole of the final round with a 6-shot lead. He hit his ball into the thick rough, the kind of rough where balls disappear forever. They searched for 5 minutes. And just as time was running out, the ball was found. But the rumors never stopped. Whispers claimed that Player's caddy, Alfred Big Rabbit Dyer, had dropped a replacement ball into the scrub. Player has always denied it. He pointed to the cameras and the marshals as proof of his innocence. But the story became locker room legend, and it fed the belief that Player was capable of anything to win. Then there was the 72nd hole. Player's approach shot ended up against the clubhouse wall. He had to play a left-handed recovery with his putter. And as he took a practice stroke, he removed a large patch of soil and grass from behind the ball. Critics said it was a clear violation of the rules, but no penalty was called. For many professionals, this moment lent credibility to the Rabbit Dyer rumors. It suggested a pattern, a willingness to manipulate situations when the stakes were high. The perception among tour players became impossible to shake. Gary Player had an ability to create or improve lies. That was the phrase used in locker rooms. Not as a joke, as a fact. Players believed that while the public saw the Black Knight, they saw someone who bent rules constantly. And in golf, where the culture is built on self-policing, that perception is a death sentence. You can be the greatest player in the world, but if your peers do not trust you, you are an outcast. Jack Nicklaus witnessed the Watson confrontation at the Skins game. He was standing right there with rules official Joe Day. And while Nicklaus has always been more diplomatic than Watson in public, his silence speaks volumes. Nicklaus and Player had their own history. In 1966, during the World Match Play Championship at Wentworth, things got so heated that the referee quit mid-match. Colonel Tony Duncan resigned because of a rules dispute involving Nicklaus and Player. The fact that it happened in a match with Player fits the pattern. Controversy followed him everywhere. Nicklaus later wrote an open letter to Golf World, defending his actions. The intensity of that response shows how serious the situation was. Even the Golden Bear, the most respected figure in golf history, could not escape the chaos that seemed to orbit Gary Player. And that is the ultimate indictment. When Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and Tom Watson, the big three who built modern golf, cannot maintain a clean relationship with one of their own, something is deeply wrong. So why did legends hate Gary Player? It was not one moment. It was 50 years of moments. It was the rooted leaf in Arizona, the lost ball at LIV, the steroid accusations without proof, the public feuds with Mickelson and Miller, the institutional embarrassment at Augusta. Each incident added another crack in the foundation, and eventually, the foundation collapsed. The hatred or resentment was cumulative. Tom Watson's "I'm tired of this" was not about one leaf. It was about a career of suspicion. Phil Mickelson's "low-class jerk" was not about one LIV comment. It was about decades of hypocrisy. Tiger Woods' dismissive response was not about one steroid claim. It was about a legend who refused to act like one. And Augusta National's lifetime ban was not about one branding stunt. It was about a family that thought the rules did not apply to them. Gary Player played the game at the highest level. He won 9 majors. He completed the career Grand Slam. He traveled the world and grew the sport. But his peers, the men who shared locker rooms and tea times with him, saw something else. They saw someone who was willing to operate in gray areas, someone who put winning above integrity, someone who could not accept criticism or admit mistakes. And in golf, that is unforgivable. The psychology behind it is fascinating. Player grew up as an outsider, a South African during apartheid, facing protests and isolation. That probably created a me against the world mentality, a belief that he had to fight for every advantage because nobody was going to give him anything. And maybe that is true. Maybe his circumstances shaped his approach. But intent does not erase impact. When Player made the steroid claims in 2007, he probably thought he was helping the game. But Tiger Woods and Ernie Els saw betrayal. When he criticized Brooks Koepka, he probably thought he was defending tradition. But Phil Mickelson saw jealousy. The disconnect between how Player saw himself and how others saw him was the core problem. Player presented himself as a man of principle. His peers saw a man whose principles conveniently aligned with his own self-interest. And that gap never closed. The Rabbit Dyer rumors, the rooted leaf, the Augusta controversy, they all pointed to the same conclusion. Gary Player was willing to bend the game to his will. And the legends who valued the game above all else could not forgive that. Here is the truth that makes this story matter. Golf only works when players trust each other. The rules are complicated. The situations are endless. And there are no referees watching every shot. The game survives because players call penalties on themselves, because they hold each other accountable, because honor means something. When someone breaks that trust, they break the game itself. And Gary Player tested that trust over and over again, not in dramatic, obvious ways, but in small moments. A leaf moved here, a ball found there, a comment made without proof. Each one chipped away at the foundation, and the legends who loved the game more than any trophy could not stay silent. Tom Watson did not confront Player because he wanted the money. He did it because the rules mattered. Tiger Woods did not dismiss Player's steroid claims because he was soft on drugs. He did it because Player's approach was reckless. Phil Mickelson did not call Player a jerk because of LIV. He did it because Player's hypocrisy had finally crossed a line. These were not personal vendettas. They were defenses of the game itself. So what is Gary Player's legacy? On paper, it is incredible. 9 majors, career Grand Slam, global ambassador, fitness pioneer, Hall of Fame career by any measure. But legacies are built on respect, and Gary Player lost the respect of his peers. Not all, not completely, but enough that the shadow is permanent. When you ask about the big three, people talk about Palmer's charisma and Nicklaus's dominance. When you ask about Player, they talk about the controversies. That is the cost of the gray areas. You might win more tournaments and build a bigger brand, but you lose the trust of the people who matter most, the people who competed with you, who saw the truth. And in golf, that trust is everything. The sport moves forward. New generations of players dominate. New controversies take over the headlines. But the stories about Gary Player do not fade. They get passed down in locker rooms, They show up in articles and documentaries. They become part of the culture because the lessons matter. The lesson that talent is not enough, that winning is not enough, that you can have all the trophies in the world and still lose the respect of your peers if you do not honor the game the way it deserves. Gary Player's career is a warning, a reminder that golf is bigger than any individual, that the rules exist for a reason, and that when you test the limits of what is acceptable, you risk losing everything that actually matters. Tom Watson knew that. Tiger Woods knew that. Phil Mickelson knew that. And they refused to let players' behavior go unchallenged. Not because they hated him, but because they loved the game more. That is the final answer. Why did legends turn on Gary Player? Because he made them choose between their respect for him and their respect for the game. And every time, they chose the game. Watson confronted him behind the 18th green. Woods dismissed the steroid claims. Mickelson called him out publicly. Augusta National banned Wayne Player and drew their line. The game won. Gary Player lost. Not on the scorecard, but in the locker room, in the history books, in the conversations when legends talk about who really mattered. That legacy, more than any trophy, defines him. A great player with a fractured relationship with those who knew him best. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let us know your honest thoughts today. Do you think Gary Player's controversies overshadow his achievements? Or does his career Grand Slam and global impact outweigh the drama? Let us know what you think. And if you want more deep dives into golf history, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We have got stories about legends, rivalries, and the moments that defined the sport. Thanks for watching. We will see you in the next one.